Okay, just a couple more things about the Treaty of Nanking, which ended the First Opium War. Already said that it gave Hong Kong to Britain. It also charges China with a really big indemnity. It has to pay $100 million to Britain. I already mentioned that it opens up four large Chinese cities to foreign trade with low tariffs. So, this is a huge defeat for China because they did want to remain restricted in terms of their trade with all these Western countries, but the end of the Opium War kind of seals the opening of China, so to speak, to the outside world. Also, interestingly, the British residents that live in China, so basically, these British merchants who are living in China and trading with China, according to the Treaty of Nanking, are also made immune from Chinese law. All right, these are called extraterritoriality laws. So in other words, basically any type of law that's restricting the movement of people, making people live in certain areas, according to the Treaty of Nanking, does not apply to these British residents. So, it's actually giving them a little bit more authority in Chinese land, maybe even than the Chinese themselves. So that isn't going to be the only Opium War. There's going to be a second one. Um, this one also is going to be, again, same people against one another. England versus China. Again, they're still really upset with the English kind of continued opium trade with China. They don't like the fact that China is now opening itself up to all these foreign goods. Also, of course, the fact that what they keep buying from England is, a very harmful drug. So the Second Opium War um, ends with England actually occupying Beijing. So it's also the treaty that ends that war is going to force China to open up even more port cities to British and French trade at this point. So now you have 10 different Chinese cities that are forced to be opened up to Western traders. And the treaties that end the war say that this trade will take place indefinitely. So basically, China finds itself forced to accept the trade and investment on unfavorable terms for the foreseeable future. So, in other words, both of these opium wars are really significant to opening up China to the West for trade, but not on terms that are generous towards China. All right, both of them are coming from the West. Lastly, you're going to have a rebellion take place within China. All right, the Taiping Rebellion. So basically, at this point, the Chinese are ruled by one type of the population called the Manchus. All right, they're actually a minority part of the population. All right, most people who live in China at this point were called Han Chinese, but this minority population, the Manchus, are actually ruling China, and a bunch of people, a bunch of Han Chinese, are really upset with the way that the Manchus are governing them. Um, clearly, the clearly the events with foreign trade are also making them very unhappy. So there's going to be this massive rebellion against the Manchus and the Qing-dominated government, right? So a ton of people rallied themselves against the Chinese government, but the Taiping Rebellion is very disastrous. Um, this is a kind of crazy statistic to think about, but as many as 20 million people perished during the Taiping rebellions. So, just thinking of that, just within that one rebellion, I mean, so many wars that we study don't even have 500,000 casualties. So it's just an immense number of people that die by rising up against their government. And the outcome of the Taiping Rebellion is that the Manchus end up defeating the rebels. The Taiping Rebellion was really disastrous for people who were going against the government. And also the Manchus, the reason why they defeated the rebellion was because they had the help of the British. So you see even more that, there's this kind of increasing Western influence over China, and there's a significant part of the population that's really upset by that, but there isn't much that they're able to do. And when they do try to, revolt against the government to stop this foreign interference, they get crushed. Okay? So the way China exists by the late 19th century is that there are tons of different countries that have what we call spheres of influence over China. So basically, All these different imperialist powers are trying to carve up China so that they all have influence over one part of it. So we already talked about the Opium Wars and the British occupation of China. So you see represented on this map a variety of areas that the British are actually dominating. All right, so you see they have regions in Western China and the region of Tibet. They also have influence over. They literally have a trade monopoly all along the Yangtze River here. Um, so you see that out of all of the carving out of China, England actually has the most significant piece. Interestingly, you also have Japan involved. Japan has a sphere of influence in China. And we're going to talk about Japan in a moment in terms of how Japan actually was subject to imperialism at first. But unlike China, Japan actually responds to imperialism by becoming an imperialist country itself. China never does that. All right, so you see that Japan actually has control over the this northeastern region of China that borders Korea. Japan actually also occupies Korea at this point, and also Japan has influence over. Eventually, it actually gains the island of Formosa or Taiwan as we know it, and that's the result of the Sino-Japanese War, a war between China and Japan in 1894 and 1895. So basically, the fact that this other Asian country that was subject to imperialism is now actually getting pieces of China show us how weak China is compared to a country like Japan. All right. Other areas or other countries that have influence, France. It gets a lease over Canton Bay and a sphere of influence and trade in several southern provinces. So France is represented in the blue here. We also see that France has influence over Indochina or Vietnam. And that we'll talk about that much more later on this year. Um, Russia also is involved. It controls northern Manchuria, and it's trying to build a railroad through the region. So we see this Russian influence way up here. Also, Germany, it's not nearly as significant, but Germany gets a 99-year lease on the port of Qingdao here. And it also gets concessions to build 2 railroad lines in Shandong province. So the last country that starts to get involved in imperialism in Asia is the United States, and you don't see the United States represented anywhere in this map. What the US does is it demands what's called an open door policy to China. So basically, they want no imperialist power in China to interfere in any treaty port of the interest of another power. So basically, like what the open door policy is doing is it's opening up China to be it's opening up any country to trade with China. No one country can kind of dominate trade with China. So despite the fact that there are these significant spheres of influence, the United States is still able to enter and trade with China. So the open door policy is significant just because this starts to signal the United States' involvement in imperialism, but certainly not the end of it. Okay, we'll pick up with Japan in just a moment here.